Yes, sir. I have a couple of questions. The first one, it's not really for me so much. It's actually from my dad. We were both pretty much indoctrinated into Christianity, like independent Southern Baptist type deal, whatever you want to call it. But my dad really suffers from, like the fear of eternal damnation, and he really just wants your guys' opinion on, like, what's the best way to go about getting past that fear.
He's an atheist now, and he's still suffering from that fear?
Yes, sir. I mean, like, he knows it's irrational.
Sure.
He just has to, but it's like keep reminding himself, but...
yeah, there's all kinds of irrational fears. I mean, being afraid of something, in many cases, is itself irrational, that you've essentially amplified the concern about something to a point that is unwarranted. There are plenty of things to, rationally fear. If you're crossing the street, you should rationally fear that there's a vehicle getting ready to slam into you and take the appropriate precautions. But if you're walking around outside, I wouldn't say that it's a particularly rational fear that you're going to be abducted by aliens just, while you're gardening. I can't say that it won't happen. But I don't want to be too glib about this, because I've heard from people who found their way out of religions, who were indoctrinated into beliefs of all sorts. The idea that they're going to suffer eternally in hell. The idea that they were born wrong, that there's something fundamentally wrong with who they are. All of these things are insidious aspects of that religions have used to kind of keep people involved, because if you're afraid of what will happen if you leave, you're less likely to leave. For me, I didn't have that much of a problem with it, and my experience isn't going to be probably not typical. Everybody's going to have to deal with it in their own way. But the thing that I would have your dad ask himself is, which hell is he worried about? If he's only worried about the one that he was indoctrinated to believe, the one that's tied to his particular independent Baptist, upbringing, then it should be pretty clear that what he's worried about is something that was specifically inserted into his mind by that group, and that he hasn't spent any time worrying about, the Catholic version of hell, or the hells of other religions that don't even fit in with Christianity. And if he isn't spending time worrying about those, then it's probably a good idea to not be as concerned about the one that he's concerned about. Now, that doesn't mean it's easy to do.
Yes, sir.
What I ended up doing, and this was pretty quick for me, was I can't do anything about it. I have no idea. I don't think there's any good reason to think there's an afterlife at all. I think the science is in opposition to that idea. But let's imagine for a second that I'm wrong and there's an afterlife. What's it like? I have no idea. Is it going to be a good thing? Is it going to be a bad thing? I have no idea. And I have no way to find out. And so if every second of this life that I spend worrying about what might happen in an afterlife is a second that I haven't made the most of in this world. Because you could sit around worrying about, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next Friday? What's going to happen next Friday? What's going to happen next Friday? And if you do that all the way up until Thursday, you've wasted the entire week. And what if it turns out nothing happens on Friday? Now you wasted the one and only week that you had. And that's the thing with the afterlife, that expands this, because you can potentially waste the one and only life that you're getting in anticipation of what might happen, in an afterlife that you don't have any reason to think is real.
Yes, sir. And, it kind of touches on, like, Pascal's wager, which I've watched just about every single one of your videos online, and actually watched the Pascal's wager video on the Patreon project that you posted on there. So, yes, sir. And
it doesn't mean it's going to be easy. This is something that takes effort, and I know people who've been atheists for 50 years who still wake up with nightmares of, hell and other stuff. But it's one of those things where everybody has nightmares, and you kind of do the rational, shake it off, and you go back about your day. What I think is amusing, amusing's not the right word, intriguing, and you might ask your dad about this. I didn't suffer from this fear of hell after I got rid of religion. I didn't suffer from the fear of hell too much while I was in religion, because I didn't think I was going there. I was convinced that Jesus was going to carry me off to paradise. But I also didn't have that big of a concern about it. And what I found from some atheists who are having a hard time putting away this particular concern is that they weren't, this wasn't a fundamental reason why they believed then. They're far more concerned about it now after the fact, some of them, than they were when they were in.
Yes, sir. And I think a lot of it had to do with like our specific church that we went to. Like they thought it was basically like a sin to search for clues that God was sending you, and you had to by faith alone believe it, which was basically it's a huge con. But it just kept people guessing. Yes, sir. And I don't personally suffer from that fear of eternal damnation, so I didn't know how to answer him. So I thought,
I would just add that it's really hard to kind of reason yourself out of something that got to you through pre-rational means. So when you're indoctrinated as a child before the age of reason, it's really hard to break and try to reason yourself out of that because it didn't come to you through reason. So there's some support groups available, recovering from religion. I think that might be really helpful because there's other people in the same boat, and you can, like any support group, you feel like you're not alone, and people give you some coping mechanisms and some ways to think about it that might be helpful if something like that's available in his area.
There's a response that I've talked about before, but I have concerns. There are people who are prone to perhaps worrying more than is warranted. And so I was talking to somebody who had a similar issue to what your dad's experiencing, and I was like, how much time do you spend worrying that your house is going to burn down? I mean, that's something that could really happen. We know it happens. My neighbor's house, catty corner from us, burned down. I live streamed it on Facebook as the firefighters desperately tried to save it. It's a real concern. And if you're spending more time worrying about an afterlife than you are about something that could actually happen, I would say that that's a clear mistake. But my concern is that now the person's likely to be worried about hell and their house burning down, and I might have added more misery to it. But the point, of course, is that your concern about things should be proportional to their likelihood. And for something that has no demonstrated likelihood, it doesn't deserve concern.
I understand. I like that answer. I appreciate it.
Sure.
One other quick thing, if we can get to it. It's kind of completely off topic of what we were just talking about. I've been talking to a lot of theists lately. And I usually start off by talking about faith and how trying to rationalize with them, how it's not really a reliable pathway to truth and everything. And the thing that always comes back up is that if you pray through faith, then you will attain a personal knowledge. And I told them, and tried to reason with them that knowledge can be, or knowing implies knowledge, and knowledge can be demonstrated. But they keep making this appeal to personal knowledge, and I don't really know how to respond to that. Like, should I even take that seriously, or?
Well, the issue, of course, you shouldn't take it seriously. I mean, if John tells me something, I then have to make a decision, and it may not even be like a conscious decision. Do I believe what John's saying or not? And if I don't find it believable and I ask for justification, and John tells me, well, it's just my personal experience, now I have a second decision to make. And what I tend to do at that point is say, I'm willing to accept that John thinks this. I don't necessarily know that he's correct. For example, my mom tells me that she knows that Jesus is real. I am convinced that my mom believes that, and I'm convinced that she is honestly trying to represent what she believes, but that doesn't mean that I have good reason to believe that Jesus is real. And if I'm having a discussion with somebody like that and they want to go down this route of, I've got personal revelation or personal knowledge or whatever else, would they believe you if you said that they were wrong based on personal revelation?
Yeah, I got you.
And now, be prepared, because for a lot of them, if not most of them, that will be absolutely ineffective at the beginning. Because from their perspective, even if they're not completely convinced, even if they occasionally have their doubts, as we know people do, they've been trained to express an incredible confidence level. I know that I know that I know that I know that Jesus Christ is Lord. And when you say something like, oh, would you believe me if I told you that I had private revelation that you were gone, and that was the only justification I could give you was private revelation, they would say, no, I wouldn't believe you because I already have the truth. That's going to be the most likely starting answer. And you're going to have to say, yeah, I know that you believe that. The question is, how can we demonstrate it? Because, we've got, both of us are claiming that we have the truth. And also they'll probably point out that you're not being sincere, that you're trying to make a point, that you you don't have a private revelation that they're wrong. So you got to make sure you keep it on the topic of, okay, maybe you're justified in believing, but do you think I am or should be as well? John could have been abducted by aliens last weekend. It could have actually happened, and he would have justification to believe it happened, provided I think he got independent confirmation, but that's a longer topic. But I don't know that John would think I have sufficient justification to believe him. Would you?
Yes.
No, but...
Yeah. That's one of those things, people talk to me, if there was a God, it would be amazing for that God to reveal himself to me. Not because I'm so special, but because I have particular standards for what would convince me. And they're standards that I've conveyed to a large audience for 13 years. And if a God revealed himself to me, there's only two possibilities. Either he revealed himself in a way that convinced me, which I could then share with other people and they should be convinced, or he revealed himself to me in such a way that I'm the only one who can be convinced. And I would still be able to express that honestly to other people, to say that I know that you shouldn't be convinced. This is a death trap for the theists, the presuppositionalists who claim that everybody knows God exists, because all they're doing is saying they can't be wrong. And you can't really have a conversation with that.
Yeah, it's extremely frustrating.
I don't know. How do you deal with that personal revelation, personal knowledge thing, John?
Well, there's kind of nothing left to talk about at that point. If they, I believe it because I had an experience. It gets down to, well, why should I believe it? Because that doesn't help me determine what's true or not. Just because you, came to that knowledge through some avenue that's only accessible to yourself. That's fine. I don't tend to argue at that point because, okay, you believe it, you have your reasons. It's nothing that I can examine for myself. So, until there is something I can examine, then, knock yourself out. If you want to convince me, though, you're going to have more than just personal revelation.
I wonder if there's a way to look at it, particularly for people who have kids. I don't have kids, but I was a kid. I am a kid. Let's face it, I am a kid. I'm a
big kid.
Big kid. Imagine you got two kids, and they were in a fight, and you ask who started it. I'm not quite sure exactly why who started it is as irrelevant as we tend to make it out, but that tends to be the first question. And they both steadfastly say that the other person started it, and you have no other evidence to go on. What decision can you make?
Punish them both.
Yeah.
I mean, do you punish them both? Do you let them both off? Do you, I think that, I'm in favor of having a conversation or figuring out something that's equitable. Maybe you guys both participated in this, or, I can't necessarily find the liar. I don't want to believe one or the other. But my thing is, I would ask the kids. You say she did it. She says you did it. How can I tell which one of you is telling the truth? And if you get them to realize that as long as one of them is clearly lying, that I can't tell, well, you might end up getting a lot more evidence, because I think the one that's lying is going to smirk at some point about how they got away with it. But having a conversation with them exposes this. And if you can't do that in a conversation with a theist about, hey, you say there's a God and it's this God. That person over there says there's a God and it's some other God. And I'm not convinced that either of you are correct. What am I supposed to do? How would you handle that situation? Ask the theist, how would you handle that situation if you were in that situation? And why would you expect me to do anything different?
Yeah. I completely agree. And y'all just have like a way of making sense of stuff in a way that, I don't know, like.
Well, if you talk to people every Sunday for 13 years, you'd have the answer to. And I don't know what the answer is. Every theist you talk to is going to be a little bit different. Some of them are not going to understand reason and rationality enough to even be able to have that conversation. You ask them, what do you expect me to do? And they're just going to say, I expect you to believe me and not that other person.
Because I'm right.
Because I got the truth. I don't know why you can't see it, but you should believe me. I mean, you're going to have those conversations, and the best you can do is point out why there's a problem with that, and take the religion out of it entirely. Talk about how you go about establishing what is a reasonable position, what's believable.
Yeah, that's how I usually, like whenever I do have conversations with people like that, I'll do that, like take the religion out of it and just say, like what's an example of how faith can lead us to truth in any other, aspect of our life besides religion,
Yep.
Just take the religion out of it. It really, seems to make it a lot, easier for them to see through it when you do that.
The last little bit of advice I'll give you, Josh, is this. Always be open to having the conversation, but don't expect to change somebody's mind in one little sitting. And if it gets to a point where you don't have an answer, just say, hey, let's stick a pin in this. We'll go off and have some fun, have some dinner. Maybe we'll meet up again in, another week or, and talk about it some more.
I definitely don't go into it with that expectation, because I was in their shoes before, and
yeah, exactly.
There was no amount of reasoning you could do with me. I was firm in my beliefs,
and yet something eventually worked, and figuring out what that is and why, and it's going to be different for everybody, but figuring out the what and the why behind what changed your mind is going to be helpful.
I don't think it was ever just like one specific thing, which is how it is with most atheists.
Right.
Like it was just. I was having that conversation with my dad earlier today. Like I can't tell you what one thing changed my mind.
And perhaps it shouldn't be one thing. If I find out that I have good reason to think that Noah's Ark story is absolutely false, that it's a patently absurd story, that doesn't tell me about the rest of the stories in the Bible, but any of this other stuff. At least not entirely. There is the idea that it's an all or nothing sort of book or religion in some senses. That if you find out that an aspect of it is false, because God can't be not true, and every man's a liar.
Yeah.
But on that note, I'm going to let you go, Josh, and we're going to move on to some other calls. But I appreciate it, and good luck in conversations.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call, guys. Have a good one.
Thanks, Josh.